Hello everybody and welcome. My name is Mike, the Ice Cream Explorer. Now, we have already gone over the foundations of ice cream, being the exploration of milk, cream, sugar, and vanilla extract. We've also gone over plain ice cream, i.e. vanilla ice cream. So, we are going to our next logical step down this journey through the world of ice cream. That's right, I'm talking about pickled ice cream. Okay, fine. We're tackling chocolate, all right? It makes sense to go to chocolate after vanilla, so we're going to chocolate. Cue the intro. Chocolate is a very well-known sweet that you can find pretty much everywhere. If you haven't heard of chocolate at this point, you may want to watch another video to get acquainted with it before coming into this one. But chocolate is derived from the cocoa bean, and unlike the vanilla bean, a lot of the flavor comes from the actual bean itself. But unfortunately, it's not as simple as just pulling the oils out of it like you would the vanilla bean to get the flavor out of. Cocoa bean goes through a very long process before it becomes the chocolate that you know and taste. Just to be warned, I am not an expert. This is purely coming from the documentary I watched. But in order to get the cocoa powder you typically know to make the chocolate, it goes through a fermentation process, it goes through a roasting process, it goes through a specific grinding process. Eventually, it goes through a lot of work, meaning unlike the vanilla bean, when it comes to making chocolate ice cream, I can't just simply take the cocoa bean and then make chocolate ice cream with it. More often than not, chocolate ice creams are derived from cocoa powder, mixing cocoa powder into your ice cream mix to get that chocolate. And every other aspect of chocolate that you typically find out there takes that cocoa powder into the recipe and makes it into bar chocolate, makes it into chocolate syrup, makes it into all of the different chocolate related things that you know out there. So when it comes to making ice cream for this particular episode, I had to do a little reaching in order to get, some interesting batches to make some interesting and different flavors with chocolate. But with that, let's just jump straight into the batch breakdown. Now, before I get too deep into this, I'm just going to start with this up front. Every ice cream recipe that I do today is going to be a 1-to-1 milk and cream ratio. We are doing 1.5 cups of milk, 1.5 cups of cream. From there, I'm more or less going to be using the same amount of sugar and the same amount of vanilla extract in all of the recipes, but I'm going to make some tweaks here and there, which I will note in the graphic to the right of me. We go into batch one. Batch one is going to be the batch that you all know and love. If you've had chocolate ice cream out there, you've probably had cocoa powder ice cream. Again, it basically just takes your milk cream ratio. We're doing 3/4 of a cup of sugar. We're doing 1.5 teaspoons of vanilla extract. And then we are taking that cocoa powder and mixing it into that mixture. We're just doing a simple cold mix. We're not cooking it. We're just throwing it in, stirring very well, because cocoa powder, if you've ever worked with it, you know that it doesn't blend very easily into things. You really have to work it in there. But that's what we did. That's batch one. If you've had vanilla ice cream before, this is probably going to be very common, very well known for you. But batch two is going to be bar chocolate. What's going to happen is I'm going to take your typical milk chocolate bar, not dark chocolate. We're working with milk chocolate for this particular one. We are melting it into a milk and cream mixture, adding our sugar, adding some vanilla extract, and then we are going to make our chocolate from that. Obviously, as I've already stated, we're going to be cooking this mixture because I don't know of another way to incorporate, hard, solid bars of chocolate into an ice cream mixture short of making chocolate chip ice cream. But that's not the goal. We're making chocolate ice cream. So again, this is going to be a cooked recipe so that I can make sure that chocolate blends into the actual mixture itself. Batch number 3 is going to be chocolate syrup. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take that typical chocolate syrup that you drizzle on top of your ice cream frequently and put it into the mixture. So again, same milk cream ratio. We're adding sugar, vanilla extract, and then that chocolate syrup is going into the mixture. Batch 4 is going to be chocolate milk. That's what batch 4 is going to be. Taking chocolate milk, taking creamer, mixing it together, or cream, not creamer, taking chocolate milk cream, putting it together, putting in some extra sugar, some vanilla extract to round out the flavor, and then we're making ice cream in it. Hopefully it's, a lot easier, and hopefully, it's got some good taste to it. We'll see. But batch number 5 is where things are going to get a little interesting. I didn't know this existed before this episode, but I'm going to be using chocolate extract. How it's created, I have no idea. All right. Sometimes I've found that it's just called chocolate flavoring, chocolate extract. Presumably it's the same thing. I couldn't even definitively tell you that, but we're going to be doing much like I would do a vanilla extract recipe. I'm just adding chocolate extract into it. I'm going to tile back the vanilla extract just a little bit in case the chocolate extract has sort of that, that bite on the end of it. I don't really want to have tons and tons of that extra kick in it. So we're dialing back the vanilla extract just a little bit so that we can make sure we get enough flavor from that chocolate extract in there. Batch 6 is the one that I wasn't prepared for myself. I was walking down the stores of my local grocery store and I stumbled into the baking aisle and I thought, you know what would be fun? Chocolate frosting. So that's what I did. What I did is I got some chocolate frosting that you would typically put on top of a cupcake, on a cake, in fillings, in whatever you would typically use chocolate frosting for, and we're putting it into the ice cream. Now, the question that I did need to consider is, am I cooking it into the mixture or am I just mixing it into the mixture? And one of the concerns that I had is if I cooked it into the mixture, it would sort of destroy a bit of that texture from the frosting, and it would just add flavors without any of the signature, frosting related elements. And so I just did a cold mix. What I did is I took the chocolate frosting, which already is fairly light, fairly fluffy. It's not, rock solid, stuff going into it. And I cold mix it straight into the mixture and then put it into the ice cream maker. So it's going to be an interesting ride. I'm not going to lie. I'm really excited. Let's see how these batches turned out. Yeah, so as I was saying earlier, the chocolate powder is pretty much what's commonplace amongst chocolate ice creams. If you've had a chocolate ice cream, more often than not, it's chocolate cocoa powder. It's cocoa powder. So, I mean, it tastes exactly like what you would expect. It's nothing more, it's nothing less. It's a very pure chocolate flavor. I don't get hints of, any aftertaste, unusual aftertaste. I don't get any secondary hints from sort of different ingredients and stuff like that. All you've got here is, I guess I will say one thing to note about cocoa powder, at least when it comes to ice cream, is it does almost thicken the mixture up. It doesn't necessarily make it chalky or grainy, but it definitely looks and feels just a tad thicker than typical ice creams would. And I think that is because of the nature of the powder itself, much like flour or cornstarch sort of thickens up mixture, even though it's not a, uncomfortable, even though it's not a, bad sort of thickening, it is a thickening. So if you do want more of a creamy sort of chocolate ice cream, you may need to ratio a little heavier towards the cream than you do the milk. I mean, the first thing that hits you is chocolate. This is just a perfectly wonderful, solid chocolate ice cream. Let's look at batch 2. So right off the bat, it's lacking in its punch. I know one of the big things is I used milk chocolate for this instead of like a dark chocolate. I was a little scared by doing dark chocolate that it would be a really heavy punch of that chocolate, and I may have messed up on this one. Admittedly, again, the chocolate's there. I'm not saying the chocolate isn't there, but it's not quite the hit that I was looking for. Depending on your love of that chocolate flavor, you might want either A, switch over to a dark chocolate and try that out, or B, add more than just a single bar of the milk chocolate, which is what I did for this. But overall, the things that I would note is chocolate bars aren't, pure chocolate. I mean, they're almost as close, or cocoa powder, I should say, like the cocoa bean. It's as close as you can get, but in order to make that bar, they need to add, some oils and some other ingredients into, the cocoa powder in order to get it to that solid state, that isn't in powder form. And I can taste some of those ingredients. Like if you took a bite of a bar of chocolate and then you took a spoonful of cocoa powder, there would be a very clear difference. And I mean, I guess dark chocolate is the closest, that you can get to that, but it's not quite as pure of a chocolate flavor, if you know what I mean. It's good. It's not bad. I feel like I need to state that over and over again because I feel like I'm just bashing this, but it's good. Like I would easily be able to eat the rest of this this cup, but it's a lighter chocolate flavor. And again, it might just be because I used milk chocolate, but I will probably be experimenting with this more in the future because I am definitely interested to see what doing a dark chocolate in this sort of format would be. But let's move on to batch 3. So right off the bat, it's good. Again, it's not much like the chocolate bar. I would say this is probably the most equivalent so far of the 3 that I've had to the chocolate bar. It's got the same sort of things in it that turn it from that cocoa powder into a, more liquid / solid state. I don't definitively know this, but if I had to take a guess, to get from chocolate syrup to chocolate bar, you just remove a bit of that excess oil in there. Some of that, the ingredient that makes it more liquid, you just remove that out and it's a chocolate bar. I wouldn't be surprised if chocolate syrup and chocolate bars are more or less the exact same thing. Obviously just in different states. But, it's not quite as pure of that chocolate flavor that you might have gotten from the cocoa powder. Overall, it's a nice sort of infusion of chocolate flavor. It's not as heavy, as I was expecting it to be. Going into the actual mixture with the quantities I put in, I was expecting a little bit more chocolate punch to it, but that's not the case. But that's not to say that it's bad. If you want more chocolate punch in the future, then you just add a bit more chocolate syrup. It doesn't seem like adding the syrup messes too much with the texture of the ice cream itself. When you start adding more liquids into your vanilla ice cream, you sort of, worry a bit whether or not it's going to ruin a bit of that texture. And I think that isn't a fear that I have with the chocolate syrup anymore. Tasting this, it's just as creamy. It's just as, rich. It's still just as good a texture as all of the other stuff, that I've sampled so far. But overall, again, this is a good one to keep in the repertoire if I want to, make a quick ice cream that I don't have, cocoa powder for or something. This would definitely work in a pinch. Let's move on to batch 4. I won't lie, this is the one I'm, the most disappointed in so far. It's not bad. It's just very light in that chocolate department. It's like a vanilla ice cream that wants to be a chocolate ice cream, but it doesn't quite make it. You get hints of that chocolate flavoring in there, but it's minimal at best. And so I guess really what I would say is if this is something you're interested in making, take a chocolate milk that you like, mix it with just standard white whole 2%, whatever other milk you want to, sort of in half and half portions. If you like I don't want to say quality, but the quantity, the concentration of that chocolate flavor from that drink, this may be perfect for you. A nice, hint of chocolate can still make a good ice cream, but it's not what I would necessarily look for in a chocolate ice cream. You're definitely better off making some more of at least the other 3 recipes that I've gone through so far. I mean, again, I don't think this is bad. It's just lacking. So let's move on to batch 4. One of the most amusing things I find about this extract ice cream is that it doesn't look like your typical chocolate ice cream. It's funny to think of a chocolate ice cream that, isn't your typical chocolate color. But if I was being honest, okay, not a fan of this. All right. I don't know exactly how chocolate extract is created. I don't know how it's derived, but when it comes to extracts in general, if you've sampled extracts through, ice cream, cakes, and other sort of things, frostings, you probably know what I mean by that sort of kick that some extracts can give, that sort of, almost bitter aftertaste that isn't necessarily, pleasant in high quantities, but, in subtle doses and infusions, it's more or less unnoticeable and still, takes the initial flavor of that extract and boosts that flavor. I almost feel like chocolate extract is nothing but that bitter aftertaste flavor. Like when I sample this, when I taste this, the first thing for me that comes to mind is like root beer. You get that unique root beer flavor without any of the joy of the root beer. I can't, even it just overpowers the rest of the ice cream. Like, I don't know if I would even define this as a chocolate taste. Again, chocolate extract probably wasn't created for ice cream. And I couldn't tell you what it was created for. But look, the highlights, the extract overpowers the rest of the ice cream. I know that there's sweetness in here, but I can't necessarily taste that sweetness. I know there's richness in here from that cream. I can't necessarily taste that richness. It's, it almost somehow feels, more textured. There are more ice crystals in there, which is strange because it's still a 1-to-1 ratio that all of the other batches are. Like, if I were being truthful with you, I would avoid making this ice cream. If you would like to follow the path, if you would like to try and sample all of the ice creams that I make here, go for it. It's not absolutely disgusting. It's just not very good. But who knows? Maybe you'll find joy in it. Maybe it'll be something that you're interested in. I might just dial back on that. Chocolate extract a little bit more and put a little bit more of that vanilla extract in there and try and hide the chocolate extract behind the vanilla extract. But let's move on to our final batch. Chocolate frosting in your ice cream. Not something I ever would have anticipated, but I will state for the record, I am pleasantly surprised. All right. Is this your traditional chocolate ice cream? No, it's not. Does it have that chocolate flavor in it? Yes, it does. You know, it's not as concentrated as you can sort of get from cocoa powder. I imagine, you know, dark bar chocolate or even chocolate syrup. I feel like in order to get that sort of concentration of chocolate flavor into this ice cream, you would have to put a lot of frosting in. And then at that point, it's almost going to destroy the texture, destroy the smoothness of your ice cream in general. But the thing that makes this so interesting is, you know, it has an unexpected light and fluffiness to it, almost as if, you know, you got almost as if you got a bunch of extra air into the ice cream itself. But, you know I didn't. I didn't, you know, churn this any longer than I did the other, you know, batches. But the frosting itself has somehow added sort of a lightness to the ice cream itself. You know, it's still pretty smooth. You know, it doesn't disrupt this texture. In fact, it might even be a little smoother. I would say it sort of tones down, you know, the richness while still making it fairly creamy. Like, it's a weird sensation, you know, and I don't know exactly why it is. It's honestly just a good chocolate ice cream. If I was served this, you know, at a restaurant or an ice cream parlor, I would be, you know, a little shocked. It doesn't taste like your traditional chocolate ice cream, but at the same time, I would not be disappointed. You know, if you are making cupcakes, if you're making cake and you have some leftover chocolate frosting, maybe a small batch of chocolate frosting ice cream is something that I might suggest. Again, I think there's still some improvements that can be made on the recipe. With that lightness and airiness, you sort of get lose a bit of that sugar taste, but you know, it's not as sweet. You know, it's a fun little gimmick. Bringing it to a party, bringing it to a social gathering could be fun, could be interesting, you know, and definitely spark some conversation. I feel like that says it all. So let's move on to the end. So there you have it. We have just gone through chocolate, experienced it in many different forms and flavors, and we've learned how it can interact with ice cream, which is, again, the whole goal of this channel, learning interesting and unique takes on infusing ice cream with the flavor that I'm trying to infuse it with. Overall, again, this is a wonderful experience. I want to hear from you. What is your favorite type of chocolate? You can either choose, you know, sweets and candies like, you know, Kit Kats, Snickers, Milky Way, stuff like that. Or, you know, are you a dark chocolate person? Are you a milk chocolate person? Are you, you know, a 70%? Are you a 85% if you are familiar with sort of baking percentages and that bar chocolate and stuff like that? But, you know, again, I feel like I know I've already said this. I'm not a huge chocolate person, but honestly, just a standard Hershey's chocolate bar is perfect for me. You know, if I am going to dabble into the world of chocolate, you know, again, a nice standard Hershey's bar is perfect for me. But again, thanks for joining me. I hope you took something away from this. I hope that you have fun out there in the wild world of chocolate, and I will see you on the next journey.